Ha! That is so funny.
How? Yeah, robot laugh track. Ha 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 ha. Okay.
Hi, I'm Jacob Kenny.
And I'm Liam McPherson.
It's the newest edition of your moderator's favorite podcast.
It's Speech from the Throne, episode 10. We're here to bring you the latest and greatest from the halls of power.
But not with more TikTok Amber Heard takedowns. We're just here to argue.
Hey, Jacob, who are we talking to today? Hold on.
That's literally
No one.
what it says.
Each other.
Good job.
Hey, Jacob, what are we talking about today?
Well, Liam, we're recording this on Wednesday, May the 11th, and we have just witnessed a few minutes ago the completion of the first official conservative leadership conservative leadership debate. This time, we do not have an empty podium representing Patrick Brown. He had the balls to show up and speak for himself, and thank goodness he did, because he actually had some interesting things to say. But I'm going to open my take by talking about the chameleon in the room, the one who I think everyone has been talking about as the front runner, Pierre. This debate was interesting. It had an opportunity, several opportunities, too many opportunities, you could say, for him to show what his personality was. And he chose every single opportunity instead to highlight his lack of personality, his commitment to his political vision, I suppose his allies would say, but I think more likely it papered over his true self and tried to paste on top of it a political veneer, an alien person with no real thoughts or feelings, but only vague political goals that you can't really put down. And the answer that really solidified this for me was when he was asked by the moderator, what is he listening to? And this man in Alberta, he says, oh, I'm listening to Paul Brandt, the famous Canadian, Albertan. I don't know why I stumbled when I said Canadian, but I think of him now more as being American, to be honest. But yes, he's technically from Alberta, Paul Brandt, a country singer. Really big playing in the radios when I was growing up there, and still a very popular name in Alberta. But it rings to me exactly the same sort of political positioning that Jason Kenney did when he brought his big blue truck, his pickup truck around Alberta in 2019. And, it's pandering. It's just pandering. He's giving the audience what they want to hear. It doesn't tell me anything about his personality. And then you ask him, what's he reading? Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life. Come on.
I could have called that.
Yeah, exactly. Like, we could have written a meme where he filled that in. What are you watching? Oh, I'm watching a show about
cancel culture,
about Trotsky and the evils of communism. Like, either this guy is a completely different species, and he has he never turns off. He goes home and just like yells political lectures to his wife for the rest of the day before exhausting himself and falling to sleep, or inserting himself into a sleep pod in the wall and turning himself off for the night. Or he's a completely different person, as we've all discovered Jason Kenney was, the man who doesn't know how to drive the pickup truck. And this is just a performance that he put on for us. I tend to think it's the performance. And we're seeing, he, in the last debate, Pierre Poilievre accused Patrick Brown of being someone that says one thing to one audience and one thing to another. I think this is the pot calling the kettle black. The reason why Pierre Poilievre is so willing to do this so willing to make that attack is because he's exactly that person. And if you see his answer as well with the supply management, I hate communism. I hate the government controlling your life. But except in this one case when the government is completely managing the private market, well, that's totally fine. And I'm going to invent a complete lie. I'm going to tell you that supply management somehow makes your life more affordable. Just nuts. This is a man who believes nothing, who has no personality, at least no personality he's willing to project to us. Why is he still allowed in the debate stage? That's my take. And there is absolutely nothing in those 2 hours of debate that convinced me otherwise. In fact, it only solidified my stance against him.
Well, I mean, Pierre Polyev is, I don't want to say an enigma. I mean, I think he's maybe an enigma to us as progressives because he's just so on brand conservative in so many ways. And like I said during your preamble, I could have called that he was going to cite Jordan Peterson's book as something he'd just read.
Yeah.
And that's not because yes, I think maybe Paul Brandt was pandering. He was aware of where he was geographically speaking, but I genuinely think the guy does. I don't know if the guy sits and watches crypto videos late at night. That I don't know if that's actually true.
I hope not.
What I do think is genuinely true is that he is into that kind of Jordan Peterson brand of conservatism. Ever since he was a little boy, he'd always been, honestly, your classic, really 1980s Reagan conservative. And I know he looks up quite a lot to Ronald Reagan. In the, I'm anti-big government, it's about individual responsibility. It's a bit libertarian even, individual responsibility, and, the best paycheck is a job, and all the usual yap. And, Patrick Brown alluded to a 2008 comment by Pierre Polyev on the day of the residential schools apology that Stephen Harper made, where he said something along the lines of, and I'm paraphrasing, but you can Google this, listeners, the best way for Indigenous people to carry on from residential schools is to get off their backs and get a job, or to get to learn what a day's work is like, or something just completely boilerplate. And I will say that's one of the ironies about this guy, I have to say, because he's been on the public dime since he was 25, and he's trying to lecture the liberals about being a career politician and about only caring about the elite and this and that, and he's selling the message very effectively, because I think he genuinely, I mean, he's been railing against the elite, quote unquote, since he was 13. I do genuinely believe he holds those convictions, but there's one major flaw on his moral superiority arc that he's sort of constructing, and that is the fact that he has been on the public dime since 25, and I think his opponents will probably start to point that out. I think that's one of the major holes in his sort of facade, and I don't know if it'll matter to his most diehard supporters, but I do think it's an important contrast to draw. Whether or not it'll have a deep effect on votes remains to be seen, on selling memberships, on the final voting in September remains to be seen. But anyway,
think about how he was attacked as well for his crypto advice. I think this is a guy who he doesn't seem to be able to interpret that his words have meaning. That I think he just sort of speaks without thinking that his words are an attack. But I don't think he sees of his. I think he sees it as political theater, because the idea that someone would follow his advice and lose money seemed to be completely foreign to him.
So I was about to oppose you there when you said, but you came around to, when you said that it's political theater. I absolutely agree. That's what I was going to say. And I don't think he stays up watching those videos late at night, those crypto videos, like he says he does. I do genuinely believe that he holds most of the convictions that his campaign is very him. It's very him. Yep. If listeners probably haven't been following Pierre Polyev as much as Jacob and I have, but you guys have to know, like I said, from the moment this guy could basically get involved in any way that didn't involve a chaperone, he was showing up to Reform Party events, then Reform Party in the 1990s, very conservative party, showing up to Canadian Alliance events, showing up to then when the Conservatives united, the sort of United Conservative events. And that's just sort of always been his brand. And I think he was involved in the PCs in some way. I can't remember if it was PCs or Reform, but he was a university president or something at one point. He was advocating for Unite the Right, and Patrick Brown was also high up in the university political sphere, and he was advocating to maintain things as they were. And so that a lot of these sort of, it's just a lot of these battles have been building up for 20 years, to be honest, 25 years. And the Conservatives and the Canadian Alliance, once two separate parties, merged in end of 2003 to become the United Conservative Party, and their first election was in 2004, and that's the Conservative Party we know today. But the cracks are starting to show, because it's such a big tent that, I mean, we saw it more last week in the sort of an unofficial debate that took place It's like they have some sort of really propaganda name now. It's the Canada Strong and Free Network or something, and it used to be the Manning Center, which was founded by Preston Manning. He was the first Reform Party leader and founder. And there was a lot of vitriol in that debate, and just like the format was a lot more open. Okay, here's the question, you guys have at it. And Charest and Poilievre were just throwing knives at each other, and Scott Aitchison was like, "Won't someone think of the children?" And he was still doing that tonight. He was a little bit saying, "Won't something think of the children?" So won't someone think of the children rather? And I think, there were moments of that, but maybe less so because they were sort of constrained by the debate format, which is something I'd like to pivot towards. I think Pierre Poilievre avoided a lot of flack tonight because of the debate format. And that was a point that before we were broadcasting that you pointed out as well. He managed to avoid a lot of scrutiny, and you can feel free to expand on that point on your end as well. But for my point, I think what it allowed Poilievre to do was kind of almost look like he was staying out of the fray. Like, yes, he raised his paddle a couple of times to get in, but everybody was dying to get a punch in on him. And again, I don't know whether or not that's going to substantially affect votes or memberships or anything, but it's playing right into his hands. Look at all these old boys coming after me. Look at all these elites. And Jean Charest tried to go on an attack where he was pestering Pierre Poilievre to be more clear on abortion, because he'd said the whole night, if I lead a government, we will not introduce legislation on the women's right to choose. We will not even pursue that, because they know it's political poison. Even Poilievre, who is playing with some other things I would argue are possibly political poison, won't touch this. And so Charest's like, okay, but you haven't said whether or not you're pro-life or pro-choice, which at first I thought was a wise approach, but Pierre Poilievre turned right around, said, you know what, I am pro-choice. Unlike yourself, who in the 1990s, as part of the Mulroney government, voted to restrict abortion. And that is true. He looked surprised and taken aback. Wasn't expecting that to come up, I guess. And it is true. He did vote for that back in the day. Obviously, his position has changed, but that doesn't matter. It plays right into Poilievre's hands of making him look like a has-been. And
or it's even more than that. It's a perfect attack for Charest, who's trying to get support from the left of the Conservative Party, and and what Pierre Poilievre is doing is essentially cutting him off from that support. Yeah. He's like, all you progressive conservatives out there, this is not your guy. This guy is pretending to be more progressive than he actually is. He's attacking me for being pro-life when he's the one that was actually out there voting to restrict women's abortion access.
And it was
it was a genius attack.
Yes, I hate to admit it, but it was quite a good rebuttal. And Pierre Poilievre has proven himself to be quite a competent debater. If you're expecting,
he's a pugilist, and that's what he's good at.
He's a witch.
That's his arena. A pugilist, a fighter.
Oh yes, he's always been the attack dog in the Conservatives. He's had a long history of the one doling out the most hyper-partisan smears he possibly can, and I do think that when it gets turned up too high, like it did last week, it'll turn a lot of people off, and I guarantee you the Liberals have stockpiled clips from that debate to paint him with if he ever becomes leader, which right now it's likely he will. But I want to sort of pivot to some of the other people on the stage. I mean, I have to say, like, I think Scott Aitchison is probably every Liberal's favorite Conservative right now, not because we'd vote for him in a general, but my gosh, talk about the only adult on the stage. I think he had a lot of coherence in a lot of his thoughts. He had some good ideas on foreign policy and domestic like defense policy that I thought were sensible, that aren't exclusively conservative ideas necessarily. Like I mean, his fiscally he was talking about conservative things and scrapping the carbon tax and blah, 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 and all that stuff, all the typical crap. But some of his other ideas were quite palatable and would be quite palatable to a general audience. It's just the problem that he's so irrelevant in terms of support. He's not a factor, but it was still nice to hear his voice, and I think his voice will add something to the debate, and if it's a close race, he could play some sort of role. I don't know for which side, but I liked hearing from him. It was nice to hear from Patrick Brown, again, not because I necessarily agreed with him, but because I think he adds another sort of, I mean, I don't think for the record that he should be in the race, based on the allegations against him, which were not refuted. It was just the age of the alleged victims that were refuted. That was the only thing that was refuted in the lawsuit that was settled. And somehow he's still being allowed to run. I have a problem with that. But from a purely like political perspective, his points, sure, it was nice to hear his voice. He sounded, again, more like an adult on the stage. And, Pierre Poilievre tried a couple of times to turn it into a university association debate. And I think he succeeded once with his attack on Charest, and it was very effective. Sometimes you want to turn it into, sometimes you want to get the zingers in. But I think Brown was trying to get at Poilievre and he wasn't able to because the format was so restrictive, particularly in the first half, that candidates would almost verbally subtweet the others, so they'd kind of allude to who they were talking about, but then that person wasn't able to respond. There was no natural exchange. There was
and you weren't allowed to say the name of the candidates you wanted to attack.
No, but then they eventually dropped that rule because Justin Trudeau was mentioned about 30,000 times, and there was no womp, womp, womp. And for context listeners, if you weren't listening to the debate or watching the debate, which, probably for the best, every time that a candidate on stage mentioned another politician by name, whether it was, like the Prime Minister Trudeau, or whether it was a candidate on the stage, there was a sound effect that would go womp, womp, womp to kind of discourage them from just, being petty. But that was quickly, they quickly gave up on enforcing that because candidates kept pushing it.
Because they were too petty.
And so that kind of went by the wayside. But I don't know. I thought the debate format the first half was quite restrictive. They had some questions about, what book were you reading and what have you been watching, and it was a little bit humanizing and kind of cute at first. It was like, oh, isn't that nice? They do regular people things. And then there were 2 or 3 more questions of that theme, and it was like, okay, can we get on to actual exchanges? Because at that point in the debate, there had been no debate section where there was sort of free conversation allowed. It was just sort of candidate A, what do you think about this? Candidate B, what do you think about this? And no chance to respond. So I had a problem with that.
Well, I'm wondering if the debate format was intentionally created to remove that element of combat because they saw how negatively the first unofficial debate in Ottawa was covered.
Possible.
That was every single newspaper had essentially the same take that you and I did, which was that it was a knife fight. It was brutal. There was blood on the floor, I think the party may have suggested that they can't possibly allow this to happen.
Even Preston Manning was grossed out.
Oh yeah, anyone would be grossed out. Watching the first debate, it's hard to imagine how any of those people could exist in the same party after one of them wins the leadership race. The debate we watched tonight. It was definitely, it got personal at some moments, but I think it was more similar to debates we've seen before where we could sort of accept that, all of these people would be willing to serve under the same party. Now, unfortunately, I think there were quite a few moments where they could have gotten more heated and chose not to. There were exchanges. I remember Bobber seemed to suggest that he was going to remove Indigenous rights in, pipeline approval, and Scott Aitchison, who was supposed to be debating him, just agreed. Oh yeah, I think that's a good idea, or refused to make a contrast with him. There was a few moments where people sort of lost the plot at Charest as well when he was debating. Babber didn't pick up on the lockdowns as aggressively as I felt he needed to really make a contrast. There was one moment from Aitchison, again proving your point that he is every Liberal's favorite in the race, where I think he had the best attack on Pierre Poilievre tonight, and that was when he said, I would make Pierre Poilievre my minister of the energy. A minister, it was either minister of the environment or minister of energy. I can't remember which, but basically he was saying Pierre, and he said, Pierre's really good at getting rid of gatekeepers. He keeps saying that in his campaign. So that's the job I'm going to give you when I'm prime minister. I think it's very much putting him in his place and showing Pierre, you talk a good game, but you have no idea what the hell is going on here. You're someone who you're a hammer. And that's how Stephen Harper used you.
Yeah.
That's what you're good at. You're good at beating people up. but don't pretend that you have some wild aspirations for government. And what I appreciated in the early part of the debate, at the very least, was when they had those follow-up questions from the moderator, and the moderator asked, like, okay, you have this grand vision, how are you going to accomplish it? And really, none of the candidates, save Atchison or Charest, had anything in line of substantial arguments. Pierre Poilievre was a little bit better at pivoting to other talking points, but he was not very good at talking about the policies that he wants to implement. He would just go attacking other people, like, oh, here's the people I would fire, here are the people I would replace, as my solution to every possible problem. Whereas Atchison and Charest actually had ideas, and they had it seems like a knowledge of the real issues facing the country versus whatever Fox News claims is the issue facing Canada.
Right.
Which I found really good to see. And then Brown, he made one of the best arguments, I thought, for for policies that we as a country need to implement, but he used conservative values to sell those policies. Yeah. And I really, really wish we could have a conservative party that makes those arguments. And yeah, I understand what you said about Pierre and the sexual. Well, I guess it's not sexual assault, but basically that he used his. It seems like he used his position of power and influence to curry sexual favors or to harass people, is what's been alleged. And this is not appropriate for anyone that's seeking the leadership of a federal party.
No.
So I wish someone would use his language. I hope Charest would use his language, because it's actually quite good. Like when he says we need to promote Indigenous self-determination and Indigenous rights and implement the 95 recommendations of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, because that's our only way to build pipelines.
Well, Charest didn't say that. He wouldn't commit to.
No, that's what I'm saying. Like, I wish Charest would say that.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Brown was the one who said that. That was a very good point. Like, yep. We need, or he says, like, Pierre Poilievre, your comments about Indigenous people is what's going to stop us from building pipelines.
Yeah,
like,
and I wanted to see them go head to toe. I wish
you could see that. Like, it was. These are the points that you need to use to sell conservatives on these policies, and I think that we as liberals have sort of forgotten that is necessary. We keep making the same liberal arguments over and over again. We support our base, but we fail to root some of our policies in the values of the other side, and or we can do the Democrat way, where it says rather than trying to root your policies in the other people's values, you compromise on your policies, and then you get no support from anyone else. Like Brown seems to be someone that's a little bit interested in. He takes a sane suite of policies and then tries to sell it on conservative values. That's what we need to try to do. You don't need to compromise on what you want to implement. There's only a few ways that you can govern this country. Mm-hmm. Basically, we're at a crossroads in this country. There's certain policies that basically have to be implemented in order for our country to move forward. Indigenous reconciliation is absolutely one of them. There's no two sides about it. If you're not willing to reconcile with Indigenous people, you must be some sort of colonizer or racist, or you're a dinosaur from another century. You have to promote Indigenous rights in order to continue progressing our country forward. Brown seems to acknowledge the truth in that. Now he's saying we're going to do that, but there's a conservative reason to do that. That's all we need in this country. We need to bring conservatives to the political mainstream by saying the policies that need to be implemented, there are conservative reasons for implementing those policies. We're not implementing them just because liberals like them. We're implementing them because they're the right things to do, because both liberals and conservatives agree they're right. That's the sort of argumentation you need to be making, rather than left versus right continually. And Brown's a terrible person for everything that we've said before. I wish it wasn't him making that argument. I wish Charest would be picking up these lines, but I was just glad to hear that line being brought out in a debate like this. I think Canada is better for having that that discussion happening.
I think one thing that Patrick Brown is effective at politically is the ability to connect with kind of slices of the population that either feel or are under sort of ignored, and connecting, bringing them into the party with their values and conservative values. I think he does a very good job at doing that, and you can do that with progressive values too. But I think there's a way. I think what the Liberal Party gets wrong is doing it in a finger-wagging way. I think what the Conservative Party historically gets wrong is not bothering. So Brown is trying to bother with doing that. And I think he's maybe in a sense taking a page out of the Jason Kenney textbook of, recruiting immigrant communities and things, but in a different way. He's having to make up for mistakes that the Conservatives made in the past. For example, the 2015 policy to ban face coverings during citizenship ceremonies, just a cheap shot. That
the
was
Barbaric Cultural Practices Act in general.
Another
I think
one.
That he seemed to be bringing that up a lot in the debate.
And, that was supported by Polyev and other sitting MPs at the time on the campaign trail. That was the party platform. And the architect of that party platform was Jenny Byrne, who is Pierre Poilievre's campaign manager. And I want to talk about Jenny Byrne for a little bit. I have a real problem with the continued platforming of Jenny Byrne. There's I believe, an ex-Liberal PMO staffer, and I have nothing against him, David Hurl, who has a podcast called The Hurl Burley, and he has a lot of the former and current politicos on his show. And Jenny Byrne was on his show, and I'm just wondering, it's starting to raise, for me, it's raising eyebrows, because this is a woman who was the campaign manager in 2015. When the Harper campaign proposed, I would say, some of the most racist policies in a long time that any political party, not that political parties didn't do that, because they sure did regularly, all of them, many years ago. This was the first openly racist party openly racist policy, blatantly to score political points, that we'd seen in decades. I think that the Byrne team should be ashamed of themselves for that. I do not know to date whether she's shown any remorse for that. She's now managing Pierre Poilievre's campaign, which is just perfect, because and maybe people don't like, I'm sure she's a nice person. Like, I've never met her. I'm sure she's a friendly person and very professional. And clearly she's good at what she does, because she has been on winning campaigns. But I associate with her with the mean, ugly, nasty Conservative Party that too many people are tired of. And it goes to show Pierre Poilievre, he's an attack dog. He's a pugnacious person when it comes to his political performances. Jenny Byrne has also been associated with just negative and mean and spiteful and resentful campaigns. If you had not told somebody, if you had told somebody outside of Canada that Stephen Harper was the Prime Minister and not a candidate, you'd be shocked, because he was running against Justin Trudeau like an opposition leader. And not just an opposition leader, but an opposition leader trying really hard to stay relevant, and trying hard to stay relevant by being mean and racist. That was the approach they tried to take. They thought it would be enough. They thought that Justin Trudeau was a complete lightweight, and he turned out to be just heavy enough to win a majority government and beat Stephen Harper. Now, do I think that was all because of Trudeau, or because people were sick of Harper? I think it's probably the latter. We tend to vote governments out, not in. However, one of the things that turn Canadians off from giving Harper a fourth look, and the thing that continually does turn people off from giving parties a fourth look, they always turn arrogant. They always get this arrogant streak to them near the end of their mandates, because they've built up a record as long as their teeth, and they have to defend it. And the default approach to that is just acting like they've never done anything wrong, which makes you look arrogant. And not to mention, you compound that with the racist, mean policies that Harper did. I think it's completely on brand for flipping out a Poilievre, who some call a protege of Harper. I think that's a bunch of BS. I don't think they're quite cut from the same cloth. I think they're both intelligent, but they do politics very differently. But I do think that a similarity between them is this mean, negative, resentful approach. And I don't know whether that's, Pierre Poilievre was like that before the leadership campaign, but Jenny Byrne is at the helm of this campaign too. Look at the press release he released yesterday or the day before, responding to David Dodge. He was an ex Bank of Canada governor. He was commenting on Pierre Poilievre's ludicrous criticisms of the Bank of Canada. Did they
And
respond?
desire to fire the acting governor of
Well,
the Bank of
and
Canada as
so
well.
here's the thing. So did the Bank of Canada act too slow to tackle inflation? That's a fair question to debate. You can debate that legitimately, but saying that you're going to saying in public over and over to millions that the Bank of Canada is essentially, you're alluding that it's corrupt and is just a printing machine for Trudeau, is very dangerous rhetoric. And that's the problem that I have with Jenny Byrne, and that's the problem that I have with Pierre Poilievre. This is the kind of shit where people get hurt. And I'm not saying the Bank of Canada, the governor of the Bank of Canada necessarily, I mean, he could, but it's things like attacking institutions, which conservatives would traditionally never do. Progressives would do it for a rightful reason. You're trying to cozy up to the truckers with coffee and donuts, and then you're going to go and try and win a general election. And I think that they're taking note. They must have been taking notes during the 2016 campaign. It is a very Trumpian. I know that Trump gets thrown at a lot of conservative candidates, and the comparisons aren't always apt. But I do think it's very Trumpian of him. He's trying to steamroll through all of the norms by normalizing it. He's trying to steamroll through the norms of not attacking Canadian institutions as a conservative by attacking Canadian institutions, even ones that traditionally would be favored by conservatives. To fit his narrative, he's playing into conspiracy theories. I saw an interview with him yesterday in French, an interview, quote unquote, with some rando from the Quebecois wing of like Freedom Convoy people. I forget exactly what his organization was called or his group, but he had a quote unquote interview with Pierre Poilievre sitting next to him, where Pierre Poilievre said, "Oh, I don't support the World Economic Forum's socialist agenda, and I'm against them, and blah blah blah." Even though his name was on their website until recently. I don't know if he asked to have it removed. I assume he did, but it's just absolute hypocrisy. Or hammering Jean Charest on Huawei, which I mean, I understand why he does that, but people should be bringing up more the fact that Stephen Harper's government sat down with Huawei in 2012. Everybody's danced with Huawei at
That's
one
what
point or
Jean
another.
Charest tried to do.
He
in the
tried,
last
but
debate.
he's not. It didn't land,
No,
and it
and
could
it doesn't
land.
make any sense either. Really, like, oh, that's the guy.
It
The
doesn't make any
company
sense
that,
coming from him.
No, it was like it doesn't make sense at all. Like, that's the company that Stephen Harper allowed into Canada. So does that make Huawei okay because Stephen Harper thought it was okay? Like,
No, but it's
like
it's
Stephen
not
Harper
about.
makes mistakes, and it's really weird that was the line that he tried to
Yes.
go. I guess he just sort of hoped that Stephen Harper's name was going to sanctify everything, but no one has more Stephen Harper cred than Pierre Poilievre, because he's the one that sat in his cabinet. No one else can use the mantle of Stephen Harper more effectively than Pierre Poilievre. So
It's
it's really
possible,
weak.
but I wonder if it was less
territory
about
for Charest to be standing
sanctifying,
on.
or if it was more about kind of pointing out the hypocrisy of Pierre Poilievre's scorched earth approach.
Yeah.
Like and that's what it is. It's really a scorched earth approach. It's you are not a true conservative if you do not think exactly the way I do. So if you worked for Huawei, which is, that's a blind spot. I'm acknowledging that. I'm not defending that, but you worked for Huawei. So screw you. You defended the long gone registry at one point. You had a disagreement with Stephen Harper at one point. It's absolutely scorched earth, and it's toxic. But it's the same approach that Trump. I mean, Trump, similar to Poilievre, made a bunch of old school conservatives look like tools. I mean, they are tools, but he kind of made them look like tools in a different way. He turned them into cartoon caricatures, giving them nicknames, and Pierre Poilievre hasn't quite done that. But he put, in that press release that I was alluding to, he put out a press release about David Dodge, the former governor of the Bank of Canada, who called his whole bit on the Bank of Canada BS. And he responded saying that he should be embarrassed for saying that, and that he should have said something, and blah, blah, blah. It's just ludicrous. It's just childish kindergarten cop BS.
Elementary.
However, it sells to a certain audience. It sold to enough Americans in 2016 when Trump got elected. Pierre is trying to ride the populist wave that is cresting across the world, and he may well succeed. That's the dangerous thing, is we all go and we sit around and we go, it's disgusting, and how can this happen, and this is gross. But that's the scariest part. It's disgusting, and it might work.
So I think what Charest is doing in these debates is exactly what you said they need to do, is just moving the Conservatives back towards a moderate position, back towards defending institutions. I mean, Charest did say that point blank. Conservatives should be the ones defending institutions. The problem is, I think Charest is very much proving himself to be yesterday's man, and that he's not following up with the modern conservative movement, and that is a movement that doesn't give a shit about institutions. I mean, they mentioned both Reagan and Margaret Thatcher in this debate, and since those two, we've had 40 years of the conservative movement basically going to war with every institution in our in our entire liberal democracy, save the church, probably. Like, that's they have completely gutted the social state. They've completely destroyed trust in government. And once you start that ball rolling, there's no natural place to stop it. So, once you've completely destroyed the government, and then of course you start attacking other institutions. We had, again, was it Pierre? Yeah, Pierre Polyev also mentions his attack on universities, and I'm going to defund universities that don't allow freedom of speech, which chooses not to define what that means for him. But yeah, exactly. So it's like, how can Charest make an argument about defending institutions when conservatives have decades and decades of conservative thought leaders telling them that they should be attacking institutions? And at this point, you've lost the plot, basically. They make a slightly better argument there when he's talking about investment opportunities, when he's talking about if we go after the governor of our central bank, that's going to scare money away. That's an argument that I think we're 20 years too late in the conservative movement. The conservatives also moved more populist. Conservatives, when I'm talking about politics with my conservative friends, we tend to agree on ideas of like concentration of wealth, that the super rich, the elites, are running everything. We just have different definitions of who the elites are. Like there isn't a conservative voter out there who is, I'm really unhappy that there isn't enough investment in Canada. Maybe that's like a small priority for them, but they're much more concerned about their day-to-day life culture issues now. They're not. This is not the pro-business party that it was 20 years ago. This is a culture-first party, a white grievance party, and he's failing to root his messages in that. You can make an economic argument of like, I'm going to bring jobs back. That's like, you can't make the more abstract argument of this is good for investment. You can't say terms like this is investment or capital. If it's too high level, it doesn't ring in this conservative party anymore. You got to talk about your jobs. You got to talk about affordability. Like, you got to bring it back to the everyman, because it's the sort of populist message that rings in this party. And given the opportunity, he consistently fails to do that. He gets the right tone. He has when Charest wakes up, he's a good performer. He's a good debater. But I think he's using his talents on the absolute wrong message for this moment.
Sadly, I hate it, but I think that you hit on something quite apt. I think what Charest is trying to do is sound prime ministerial, because he knows that a great amount of clips are going to go to other Canadians who aren't buying a conservative membership, who might vote in the general. They may not buy a membership, but they might vote in the general. I think based on, I don't want to say that everything is comparable to Trump 2016, but here I am going to draw it in again. When, say, Jeb Bush and some of the other old boy Republicans tried to act like old boy Republicans and tried to sound presidential and tried to talk about their records, they got steamrolled. I think the difference between Trump and Polyev, and this is, again, an attack that his opponent should be using more. Polyev has been in public life, not in public life, has been employed on the public dime since he was 25. He's been an MP since 2004. An MP that was elected in 2004 and has been elected in the same riding 7 times is trying to tell you, all of a sudden, now I hate the elites.
Yeah.
What his opponent should be doing is, where were you in 2004? Why didn't you do something about it then? Not because necessarily as a backbencher MP he could have done much, but the average Canadian wouldn't necessarily be engaged with what level Pierre Poilievre was at then, unless they were nerds like us. So what their opponents should be doing, including Charest, is more of, okay, you want to play the old boy game? Sure. I mean, you wouldn't actually say it this way, but I'm just paraphrasing. You want to play the old boy game? Sure. Yeah, I've been a politician for 40 years, and you have been a politician for 20. Where were you in 2006 standing up against me? Where were you in 2010 when blah, blah, blah? Like, this is the kinds of things, these are the kinds of contrasts that I think his opponents have that maybe Trump's opponents didn't have on him because, yeah, sure, he was a real estate mogul. He was in public life, but he wasn't a politician. So it was easy for him to say, well, if I was there before, I would have done a better job. But Pierre Poilievre, though he is using some of the same tactics, doesn't have the benefit of saying, well, I'm new to public life. Yeah. He's not. He's been around for almost 20 years, and much of it he was a crown minister. So it's like, okay, what did you do when you were minister other than wear a blue tie and talk to us about, like, partisan BS? And that's what people should be pointing out. Pierre Poilievre is extremely intelligent, and he clearly has some policy depth when he wants to be, but he's a retail politician in the classic sense that he sells you red meat. Mm-hmm. You can poke holes in that. You can say, okay, Pierre, what would you do? And watch him stumble through an answer. Not because he's not smart, but because that's not his attack. He wants to get mean. Yeah. And there are, believe it or not, ways to make people who are mean look like an idiot. And being prime ministerial, though I'll give Jean Charest credit, shows his grace as a candidate, is not going to sort of pull the support he needs as much as I think he thinks it does. I think it pulls him support from maybe centrist Canadians that, again, aren't going to buy a conservative membership, but might vote for him in the general. I don't know whether or not it's enough to sell memberships to those people. You need to look prime ministerial. It's fine to look prime ministerial, but you need to follow that up with, okay, you want to talk old boy politics? Well, guess what? Blah, blah, blah. You know what I mean? Like, that's where he needs to come in and point out the fact that, what has Pierre Poilievre done? He was like an inconsequential minister for 3 years, I think, or something. I'd have to go look at his record.
Even less than 3 years.
The rest of the time, he's been a backbencher. Well, he
was a parliamentary secretary to Stephen Harper before him. Like, he was the guy that took...
He was the attack dog.
That took hits for the prime minister, and that was his job.
And then I remember I don't know how long, but he was employment minister for at least a brief amount of time.
I think I remember him in a couple of, I would say like 18 months at the max at the end of it. But yeah.
We'd have to fact check this, listener, so don't take us seriously here. But we do know that it had to have been less than 5 years that he was a minister. Like, not for very long. Most of his career, he's been a backbencher or an opposition critic. And what has he done for you? What has he done for you?
Someone like Jean Charest is sort of the best example to put that contrast, because he was the youngest cabinet minister in history. I think he was 28 or 27 that he became a minister in Mulroney's government. So it's like in the very beginning of his political career, people already saw that he had talent. They put him in the front benches, and then he went on to lead the Liberal Party in Quebec and to become the premier of Quebec. Like, he's someone who can make that very convincing argument of, I didn't just enter politics to hear the sound of my own voice. I entered politics to get shit done, and that's what I've been doing. And he tries to do that. I think that he just consistently fails to bring up things in his record that are actually going to resonate in today's audience. He talks about like lowering taxes in Quebec, which, yes, that's true, but the simple fact that he allowed cap and trade to exist in Quebec, and that's considered a carbon tax. It's not a carbon tax, it's cap and trade, but whatever. That's considered evil, and in conservative minds, the carbon tax is equivalent to like a tax on 300% of your income. It's like, I know a carbon. I don't know why conservatives aren't able to do math, but for some reason they're convinced that a carbon tax is like by far the greatest burden on every single Canadian. It's not, and you can show. I mean, Pierre Poilievre at least was willing to make a more broad-based argument. He said that the tax burden overall increased in Quebec during Charest's tenure. I think that's complete BS, because every stat that Pierre Poilievre has ever said is wrong or out of context. So I have no reason to believe him when he said tonight that that's what happened. But certainly just the simple fact that you had it, you lowered taxes on one end and you brought in a carbon tax on the other, in conservative minds that's a washer that still makes you evil, even if you lowered income taxes by much less than you raised in any sort of cap and trade scheme. So he needs to find something else. And when you have a record that long, you can certainly find something else. I think it's pure laziness on the part of Charest and his team that he's not choosing to find it. I think it has to be some sort of culture thing. And this is, I'm going to get into some really murky territory here, and this is probably where progressives are going to get angry with me, but I think that actually Charest going against Bill 21 and going against the Quebec Charter of Values is a mistake. He implemented
in his own province. Yes,
he not just in his own province, but in the rest of Canada. Actually, he implemented
interesting
the forerunner of the Charter of Rights and Values. Like, he clearly was, as Quebec Premier, was willing to play on that side of the fence of talking about secularizing culture, removing overt religious symbols. Like every liberal, every premier of Quebec, liberal or PQ or now CAC is willing to make these sort of dog whistles. I think if he was really interested in winning the Conservative Party as it exists now, he might want to lean in a little bit more in that direction and say something. It's something about culture warrior stuff. Maybe not that. Maybe it's something about going against universities, because he fought a lot against student activists. You got to find something like that, where it's you're fighting against woke culture. That's the way that you're going to get conservatives in this moment to go against you. It's a culture moment time. Talking about taxes when you can be so easily defeated on carbon taxes is really weak ground. He's got to find the cultural reason, because that's what's animating the base, and he's failing to find it.
Well, and for a point of context, listeners, Jacob isn't bringing that up because he supports the Quebec Charter.
No, I'm very against it, but I'm suggesting that, like, there's a reason why it's so politically motivating to bring it up in Quebec. It's because it's popular, and we're seeing that the popularity of going so hard against religious minorities it's a popular thing in the rest of Canada too. We're a racist country. And the Conservative Party is a party that's willing more than any other party to allow that flag to fly. I think that I'm very proud of him for standing against it and taking such a strong stance. He's going to make it's a principled stance, and it's because he's taking the principled stance is why we can be certain he's going to lose.
Well, and it's like Scott Aitchison's entire campaign.
Yeah, exactly.
He's the only sane one on the stage, and for that reason, he's gonna lose. It's so sad.
You take the high road,
it's
you're
so
damned,
sad,
basically, in the party.
And I wish we lived in a political climate where we could run on what genuinely was right. But the reality is even if you're Charest, I noticed Charest, I definitely, if he wanted to win more red meat votes, he would go more red meat. But I notice even he has succumbed to trying to get the few anti-woke, anti-cancel culture lines in there, because he knows it's what people want to hear. Now, you're right, he's not, if he wants to win more red meat memberships, he's not doing enough of it. But I noticed, he made a little comment when he's like, I'm not a hyphenated conservative, maybe the left can hyphenate people.
Yeah, true. Yeah.
I rolled my eyes at that, which progressives are gonna roll their eyes at, but conservatives are gonna go hoo 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 hoo. So if he did more of that, maybe he'd sell. He needs to
root that in his record. Basically, is what he needs to do. He needs to show, if that's going to be your line, and I'm against that morally, but if that's going to be your line, then you need to root in your record, because your whole spiel is that you have a record that you can stand on, that you have a proven record of getting things done. So you got to find some stuff that you did in the past that actually conservatives care about, because right now they just don't. They could not care less.
And red Tories specifically, who I would, Charest would probably not like me using that term, but that's what he is, and other red Tories like him are in a very tough position in the current Conservative Party, particularly after the fact that Erin O'Toole tried to co-opt the party as a cohort. covert red Tory,
Yep.
when the whole time he should have just been honest about his position, and perhaps he would have cobbled enough support together to get through, building other coalitions. But instead, what he did is, and I'm not even disagreeing with what he did, to be honest. I think it's perfectly fine to act a certain way in a leadership contest and govern another way, because sometimes that's what you need to do to be able to get in a position to govern. But he didn't govern because he failed, and he failed because he was too wishy-washy.
Yep.
He was getting attacks from within about being too left on things, and then he would be wishy-washy, and then everybody else would go, "What are you doing?" And then he just looked like a complete flailer. It's like, if you're gonna flip-flop, which he did, I'll admit that, then you flip-flop once. You run as a conservative, really hyper true blue conservative, which he never was. He was always a red Tory. Then you pivot to full, like, and he kind of went halfway. Like, he's like, conservatives recognize carbon pricing, of which of course incensed them. But he didn't go far enough on other things. He tried to rile up the campus conservatives by saying, "Oh, you can own the libs," by saying that residential schools were a good place sometimes, and like he just made stupid gaffes like that. It's like, bro, no. Like, don't even bother to appeal to the red meat conservatives. Now that you're the opposition leader, you don't need them. You can go out and build a new, like, he could have won that election. He could have built a new coalition going a little bit further to the left.
Absolutely.
And sure, it would have pissed off his base, but the country would have been in a lot better position than they are now, because now the party is hypersensitive to people like Charest, Brown, and Aitchison, who I would say are to the left of the party, historically, for the most part, and they're hyper attuned to any sort of flip-flop that will happen, which is why Charest is having to almost be stiff and like almost give lip service to, I wouldn't say he's stiff, like he speaks comfortably, but he's stiff in the sense that he feels like he has to throw some red meat lines out every now and again, and they don't really come naturally to him, to people who know his positions in the past. So it's just a little bit weird to watch, I guess. And I think the fact that he's trying to come off as prime ministerial without pointing out Pierre Poilievre's flaws in an effective way, and without kind of, he's leaning very much on his involvement in the National Unity campaign, and it's true, like he was a big part of that campaign, and he was effective. But I read, I can't remember which article, who wrote this, but I was reading an article recently, and I feel bad that I'm forgetting the publication and the author's name, but it was something along the lines of, Charest telling stories about national unity, and it's true he was formidable in that sort of whole spiel in 1995 when Quebec almost broke off. But those are old war stories to conservatives, and you kind of touched on that. You said, conservatives don't care about, the modern day conservative movement doesn't care to defend institutions, and maybe I should add a caveat to what I said about institutions. I'm surprised, I think, that in a way that conservatives are moving away from institutions, but also not surprised, because it's just the populist wave that's coming with Donald Trump. I wish conservatives would defend the existence of the institution, but admit it needs reform. But that's still something of a middle ground. That's why Pierre Poilievre comes in, full stop. I'm going to fire the governor of the Bank of Canada. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. Because anything that isn't that looks like, then suddenly Charest or whoever else says, "Oh, we need to reform the institution." Looks like they're a gatekeeper in the mushy middle, or that's how Pierre Poilievre can frame them. So you can get boxed in, and Charest did get boxed in a couple of times, and he was on the defensive because of his posturing on some of the issues. He needs to embrace the fact that he's been around for 40 years instead of acting like it's an Achilles heel, and instead of talking about things he did 30 years ago, talk about what the breadth of experience that you bring to the table will do. What will you do for the party now? Focus more on that. And he's talked about that a little bit. Like, he got into it with the two bases in the north and stuff, and like he's getting into it a little bit. But let's see more of that. And then when Pierre Poilievre comes at you for being a Quebec liberal, then you can pull his pants down and embarrass him.
Yep.
So
I do think that the national unity question is probably the perfect example of Charest being like totally offside with the modern conservatives, and constantly bringing up,
they don't care
like,
about
exactly
that.
like modern conservatives are the ones that are going to break up the country, because they're the separatists in Alberta that are thinking, the country's moving too far to the left, and I'd prefer to go my own rather than continue with this shithole liberal country. Like, my conservative relatives are more than willing to talk my ear off about such a possibility. I'm well aware that the commitment to national unity is not as strong in that party as it used to be. and constantly bringing up that I was the savior of Canada. I mean, even me growing up all my life in Alberta, like I know how Canada was saved. We just cut Quebec another check. Like a Westerner watching a Quebecer telling us about how lucky we are to still have a country, I'm always rolling my eyes a little bit at that. Like, there's a cost to keeping the country together, and it's oil money from Alberta going directly into Quebec's coffers through equalization, and the rest of and Quebec pretending that it doesn't get that. And it's always going to annoy me a little bit, and he's a perfect reminder of that to every conservative that's watching at home. The perfect attack on Pierre Poilievre from Jean Charest is exactly the same sort of attack that Pierre Poilievre pulled against Charest tonight, and that was it's against the front that you would never expect. And Pierre Poilievre attacked Charest for his for taking pro-life stances in Parliament. That was an attack on his left that he never could have seen coming. And you see when Pierre Poilievre, by contrast, is most afraid, it's when he's attacked by Leslyn Lewis on the right. And that's where Jean Charest needs to be attacking Pierre Poilievre. When he's been in Parliament for so long, when he's taken so many votes, you can certainly find something in his record where he's probably said or done something too far left for the party to accept. That's where he needs to be attacking him, and he chooses not to. Leslyn Lewis is very good at forming the contrast. Unfortunately, she forms the contrast on like 80-20 issues or 90-10 issues where the vast majority of Canadians are against her, particularly when she is saying, attacks Pierre Poilievre for not being pro-trucker enough or not being pro-life enough. Like, you'll get cheers for that in the Conservative Party. You're not helping yourself with the wider Canadian public. It's a very, very resolved issue in the rest of the wider public. But you can certainly find some issues where probably Pierre Poilievre has been more left in the public. Just he's a guy that he's lived in Ottawa for such a huge portion of his life. He's been, living on the public dime his entire adult life. You can certainly find an example of him acting like an elitist or, do the thing that Pierre Poilievre did to Maxime Bernier and attack him for having his name on the Davos website. Like you can always find something if you want to find it, but he's not willing to attack him from that flank because I guess he thinks I want to be the left wing candidates. I think the problem is like left leaning candidates in the Conservative Party left leaning voters in the Conservative Party have absolutely nowhere else to go but Charest at this point. Scott Aitchison or Scott Brown if you want to get or Patrick Brown if I guess technically, but Patrick Brown seems to be going even after a completely different constituency at this point. If you are particularly a white you're ethnically white but you're a red Tory, your only camp is the Charest camp at this point. So Charest doesn't need to worry about going after those guys, those Atlantic red Tories, those Quebecois red Tories. You gotta cut off Pierre Poilievre from his base, which is the right. You gotta find some way to sever him, to disconnect him from those guys. Make those right wing voters free agents, or make them stay home even better, so they stop polluting your party. That's the way you gotta be attacking this guy, and he chooses not to in every possible time that he's given the opportunity. He chooses not to take it, and
he tries to take the high road, which I think works in a general, but doesn't work for this Conservative Party. And I say this Conservative Party because I do think there was a time where it could have worked, and that time is not now.
Yeah.
And with his current approach, and so I mean, to the final point I'd like to bring up, and I'd like your thoughts on it as well. The thing about this populist wave that's consuming the country with all of its rage and all of its anger and all of its vitriol, it's a backlash. I mean, I don't want to rehash too much of what's already been said about what is deemed the culture wars, but it's a backlash. What it is at the heart is a backlash against other groups gaining rights.
Yep.
That's what it is. Yep. And because other groups are gaining rights, it is taking the spotlight off of the original group, it being, the white Anglo-Saxon Protestants, white people, and it's upsetting for some of those people. And there are legitimate grievances with working class whites in terms of, not with any race issues, like I'm not talking about any of that, but I mean, like, economically speaking, they've been left behind. There's been no severance supports for them, or lacking severance supports for them. There's been no attempt to transition them to other industries. All Trump did in 2016 was say, "Oh, I hear ya," and they went, "Oh my God, he's our guy." There's not a lot that you need to do to speak to these people, and that's where I think progressives have an opportunity to pull some of these disaffected people, particularly union people, back on side.
And obligation to do so.
And obligation to do so, particularly in the NDP, which is supposed to be a workers' party. And so I think it's surprising to see. I mean, I think the NDP, as it currently exists federally, pays lip service to workers, but it's just surprising to see that it's kind of, like, center left politicians are like surprised when they wake up and they've lost their voting coalition, kind of thing. And that's because oftentimes they either advertently or inadvertently sort of give the opposition ammo to fire at them. Now, the Trudeau Liberals are definitely an exclusively lucky case in that they had Donald Trump as president in the U.S., so they were a sign of stability for many Canadians who were terrified and hate Donald Trump, who were terrified that Trump took power in the States. They've had an opposition party that has imploded 3 times in a row now, including in the last election that they could have won. So he's been handed a lot of political gifts. But on the flip side, he's failing. He's somebody who, and I won't go at length about Trudeau because we already have, but he's somebody I've talked about before in this podcast, fails to realize his own blind spots. So there's ample opportunity for Pierre Poilievre or someone else to exploit that. However, the crux of these culture wars is amplified by misinformation and the internet. And it's a large piece of Pierre Poilievre's campaign. He's appealing to a crowd that, I don't want to be condescending or rude, but they're not always politically literate. And he's appealing to a lot of people who believe that the World Economic Forum is in control of everything. It's a very popular conspiracy theory. The World Economic Forum is using world leaders as puppeteers, when in reality they have no real power at all beyond a fancy gala. If you don't believe me, look up Conservative MP Michelle Rempel-Garner's article on it. She wrote basically talking about those get-togethers in Davos, Switzerland, saying that they're glorified galas. They don't. It's a place to network. They don't really get any. They put out a policy communique, but it's like any other think tank. They don't really do. They don't have any real power other than to, like, bring people into their orbit. It's not like they're puppeteering. But Pierre Poilievre has exploited this, and the internet has the algorithms on the internet exploit it, because it's what continues to get clicks, and the more clicks it gets, the faster it spreads, and the faster it gets shown in people's recommendations. And if you're young males, you're getting shown all this stuff about the World Economic Forum controlling everything. And the thing that Pierre Poilievre has done very cleverly, I hate to give him this, is appealing to young people on issues like housing, for example. Obviously, he's not going to be able to fire all the gatekeepers. Everybody knows that. It doesn't matter. Because, again, the people that he's attracting are not people who traditionally would care about politics. They don't care about that. They said they're going to vote for him because Pierre Poilievre said he'll fire the gatekeepers. Now, I'm not saying progressives need to come in and say they'll also fire the gatekeepers, but we've got to do more than just saying what the Liberals are saying, which is, oh, we'll have 300 more houses built in 5 years. Yeah. That's not good enough. And any party, it is true, any party or leader that promises to solve the housing crisis is lying. But you need to have something substantive to say, and progressives continually don't on an issue that should be very easy for them. Yes, they're getting better, particularly progressives are getting better at putting themselves in the conversation, particularly with unhoused people. But liberals, who you notice I'm not saying that they're progressive, because I don't quite think that the party under Trudeau is progressive enough. Liberals kind of have their hands tied, where they're like, oh, well, we're doing everything we can. But then, meanwhile, house prices are soaring and nobody can get in the house. And as Pierre Poilievre likes to cite, 32-year-old in their mom's basement, blah, blah, blah.
So
but
common.
It's a good line,
too, yeah.
but it's a clever, so, like, that's the thing, is he's got this very clever combination of this angry populist wave, and he's poking at, like, a lot of internet bros that are reading about the World Economic Forum and about Jordan Peterson's meat diet and whatever else, and we laugh and we think it's hilarious, but then he slams in a legitimate policy issue, housing, with an effective, catchy line. It's very clever because there's just enough red meat to hook people in, and then there's things that he says he'll do on issues that matter to not just conservatives but all Canadians. So what do you think it'll take, Jacob, for other candidates to kind of combat that? And I don't just mean the conservative leadership candidates that we saw on stage tonight, but the Liberals. How are they going to respond to a guy? Do you, or actually, let me rephrase the question. Do you think they're going to respond with more of the same, or do you think that they'll manage to cobble together an effective response
on the housing crisis in particular?
On the housing crisis and on issues like it, where Poilievre is kind of jumping in to offer an easy solution.
Well, it's interesting that he continually brings up inflation and house prices, because those are two things that everyone agrees is a problem, but that actually only affect a particular tranche of the population there. And I think this is where the NDP and the Liberals are having some problems in addressing the issue, because essentially the only way that you can solve these sort of economic problems is by creating winners and losers through your fiscal policy. Like in particular with housing, it's just very clear the ways that our cities are zoned privileges the owners of houses that are already built, and we don't live densely enough. We need to be able to build much more dense in our cities, but that's going to basically completely destroy the property values of everyone that has their property. It's going to make the property much less scarce, and that would implode the life savings of a huge portion of the population as well. And that basically is the same sort of deal with inflation. You have everyone is concerned about inflation, but there are some people who their wealth is dramatically being increased because their property values are going up faster than the price of their grocery bills. So the government cannot pursue policies that help both of these people simultaneously. At some point, you will have to transfer the wealth from people that are gaining in the current economic system to those who are losing. Now, Pierre Poilievre obviously isn't going to do that. He's just going to feed the egos of the guys that are stuck in the basement, hoping that they could have a home of their own. Liberals need to be willing to make those sacrifices and actually show the policy differences and say that we are going to implement a wealth tax or something like that to invest in a more affordable life for Canadians, whether that's more affordable housing or more affordable groceries or a basic income tax, a universal basic income. It has to be funded through some sort of wealth transfer. It's the only way that we're ever going to escape this cycle of inflation. When when the people at the top are making more and more money, they spend more and more on scarce resources, and that increases the price for everyone below them, basically. So the only way you solve that problem is by cutting off the wealth at the top and spreading it throughout the pyramid. If we're not willing to do that, then we're not going to fix the problem. And we can invent all sorts of populist messages, and we can try to beat Pierre Poilievre in his own game and lie to the public better. But it's just not going to work when you're trotting out on their fourth term and you're pulling out all the same stops. At this point, the only thing that's going to save the government is by actually showing a new policy, by actually giving your solutions, because that's your contrast. You say, Pierre is all talk, I'm solutions. If your only response is more lies, but just lies from the left rather than lies from the right, you've lost the election already.
I mean, I do think it's key. I think you're right. I do think it's key to wrap actual policy. If progressives are going to present a solution to this issue, it's key that they wrap that policy issue in a populist tinge. Like, you sort of have to meet the tinge of the moment, I think, the frame of the moment. There is a way to frame it populist like Poilievre, but it has to be a substantive solution. You can't go and promise smoke and mirrors. Like, you can't say, well, I'll also fire the gatekeepers. No, not good enough. You have to come up with something that's different from Poilievre, that's a contrast, and you can frame it populist, but you need to come up with something that's different and something that's realistic. And I think otherwise you're just going to continue to lose faith. And I think that's why I find Poilievre so dangerous, because he's playing this game to get votes. He's riding the wave of the moment. It's very blatant, but he's also playing with fire.
Yep.
And if progressives can't respond to that, then he's going to burn the whole country down. So
absolutely,
I think on that happy note, we can wrap it up. And I hope you enjoyed this.
We're such optimists, aren't we, Liam? We just we're really the happiest podcasters around.
We really are. And if you also agree and you're also happy, then you can send an email to speechfromthethrone@gmail.com. Tell us what you'd like to see in future episodes. Mention something we didn't talk about. Ask us a question. Whatever you want. You could, send us ideas for new movies to watch, new music to listen to. You could send us a copy of the phone book. Whatever you want, really.
We'd love to hear from you, no matter what it is.
We would love to hear from you, no matter what it is. And with that, we will see you in the next one.
Adieu.